Okay, so I have the delightful job of introducing my dear friend, Lorenzo Fioramonti. And I was remembering, ironically, for people who work on social justice and sustainability, we first met at a very fancy venue on the banks of Lake Como, probably about, at least 12 years ago, I think, and it wasn't for George Clooney's wedding, though we were both invited. But it was actually for a Rockefeller gathering, one of those convenings that the Rockefellers do around building a new economic paradigm. And Lorenzo was one of the stars of the convening, and I got a Guernsey because someone was sick. So I got the last minute call up and I got to turn up. And Lorenzo was then a professor at the University of Pretoria. He had just written the book, Gross Domestic Problem. And we got to hang out, and he was, despite being one of the rock stars of the convening, we became friends. And I subsequently visited Lorenzo in Pretoria a couple of times for plotting and scheming around organisations to disrupt the status quo and how to challenge economic orthodoxy. And what I saw is that Lorenzo is not just a scholar. He was practicing permaculture in his backyard in their house in Pretoria, and he was helping local minibus drivers set up a worker-owned co-op so that they could keep the money that tourists brought in. But it wasn't until a few years later that we both found ourselves in Costa Rica that he mentioned something to me that pretty much changed my life, made me realise I'm never going to be a diplomat when I grow up. But he said, we were talking about the dominance in global geopolitics of countries that have power because of the size of their GDP. And we were talking about the G7. And he said, Catherine, you know what we need is a we 7. We need a wellbeing economy 7. We need countries that are heroes because of their efforts to build economic systems that work for people and planet. And I thought that was a cracking idea. And I went back to where I was working at the time in Oxfam in the UK, and I had this great boss who said, run with that. And I thought we'd be doing it together. But Lorenzo at the time then got tapped to go into Italian politics. And just when you thought Italian politics couldn't get any spicier, it did. And somehow Lorenzo managed to stay afloat and keep his integrity and became Minister for Education, as you've already heard, and he introduced a compulsory curriculum for sustainability for Italian students. After that time and the craziness, which some of you, if you're able to stay for the film this evening, you'll get a sense of that. He then moved to the rainy UK and headed up the Institute for Sustainability at the University of Surrey, one of the very prestigious sustainability institutes across the UK, but is now back on home ground in Italy and now working for NATIVA. So he's an incredible advocate for economic system change. He doesn't just write about it in academic journals, but he rolls up his sleeves and goes into politics to try to change it, and is now working with businesses. But he's also a really, really dear friend, no matter how much the professional callings on you, and I've seen evidence of this when, in the midst of an Italian election, one of our mutual friends was going through a tough personal time, and you hung out with him that evening, the night you were getting elected to Parliament. So you're going to have a real treat to hear from Lorenzo, and do make sure you get to have a chat with him and spend some time with him over the next few days. Welcome, Lorenzo.
Wow, that was moving, and the most beautiful introduction I've ever had. Thank you so much, Catherine. Thanks, everyone. I'd like to thank the organizers. I'd like to acknowledge the country, the beauty of this community, the thousands of years of history that this beautiful country can boast, and also this incredible interconnection between people and nature, which is something I think you take for granted. Most people around the world cannot do that anymore, especially those like me coming from Europe, that have long forgotten what it means to walk barefoot, to be able to be in touch with beautiful ecosystems. Yesterday I took a walk around the lake and I've seen the most beautiful birds. Colorful, singing, making all sorts of sounds, something that really has a fundamental impact on our well-being. Okay, so I've been invited to open this conference, and one guy invited me. She said, bring as much energy as you can, and I'll do my best after 29 hours on the plane. So I've given it a title, and I know that you guys are all experts of well-being. The presentation was really, really instructive and eye-opening for someone coming from the outside like me as well. There's a lot of expertise in this room, and I think this is, in a sense, a fundamental gathering of pioneers that can really make a difference in a country that has so much to boast, also so much to learn, but can be a fundamental leader in global change. We do need that change dramatically at this stage. So the title I've given this presentation is Wellbeing Economy, and what we need a simple shift, very simple yet revolutionary, from more, which is what we've been told that economic development is, to better. And I really think that we're all more motivated by doing better than doing more. And I think that applies to many different sectors. But let me get started with something as banal as revolutionary. Let's see if this works. And let's see if I speak like this, and if I move, it's fine, right? So the lapel works as well. So this is something that we tend to forget. We live on this beautiful blue marble. And this one, not only is it full of colors, and it's fantastic, and I think, every time I think about it, that we were given the chance to be on the only living planet in the universe, as far as we know, is fantastic. I mean, what are the odds? And it's beautiful, it's diverse, and we take it for granted. We take it for granted so much so that there's more money at this stage spent on exploring life on other planets than trying to preserve the one that exists on the only planet that we really know. It's crazy. I think if aliens were to come here and wonder what you guys are doing, with your money, you're spending more money on trying to explore life. I would like to talk to Elon Musk, for instance. Even if there was a way to go to Mars, I would say to him, what's the point of doing that and have a terrible, shitty life on Mars when we could try and have a good life on this one? Look at how beautiful this is. But there's one thing that we forget about it, and that's this, that it's finite. It's a closed system. Nothing is produced, nothing is destroyed. We have to look after it. I think in a sense we're like those unpaid cares that we mentioned. We as humans need to take care of this beautiful thing with God. Now you may say, well, this is trite, this is conventional, but how many children are raised thinking in those terms? How many schools pay enough attention to the fact that we are lucky enough to be on the only planet that's got life, that has got this beautiful diversity, and if we don't take care of it, it's going to be gone. At least it's going to be gone in terms of our ability to live on it. By the way, this is quite crucial. The planet doesn't really care about us. The planet could be just as happy without humans. Even if this planet was not to be livable anymore, I'm pretty sure that Mother Earth wouldn't care. I don't think Mother Earth has got more or less well-being than Venus. I think they're on pair. They're equally happy. One has got humans, the other one doesn't. We shouldn't do it for the planet. We should do it for ourselves. And let me ask you a question. Should humans go extinct? Okay, all these thousands of years of history. What do you think, what kind of big enterprises of humans do you think would still be there 1 million years from the moment of extinction? The Colosseum, the pyramids, Canberra, Parliament, the Parliament of Canberra, the beautiful towers that you see in the city. What do you think? What do you think would be left of us, of the fact that we ever existed on this planet? Give it a shot. Nuclear waste. Plastic. Correct. Well, this. The only thing that will be here after we're all gone would be our waste, whether it's nuclear or more simple waste that we produce every day. Many of the different types of waste that we produce have the ability to live and endure time, more than 1 million years. Some of them are already actually integrating themselves with parts of our planet. They're becoming plaxiglomerates, so like fundamental fossils made out of plastic. I think this is also something that should be taught in schools, that after all the history and all the activities, the only thing left of us on this planet would be the thing that we like the least. And that tells us a lot about the essential elements of our economy. So this is a graph that all of you are familiar with, right? Stefan, one of the authors, was from Australia, from the Australian National University, if I'm not mistaken. And this is a graph that tells beautiful and non-beautiful stories at the same time, but they all connected. So it's called the Great Acceleration. You see over the past few decades, we have done a lot of things, and many of those things have been celebrated: increasing economic production and consumption, growing population, foreign direct investment, all these things that we talk about all the time, we don't even know what they mean, but also a fundamental impact on our biosphere and our society. If you look at the graphs on water use, on paper production, on transportation, the building of large dams, on ocean acidification, methane, carbon dioxide, and all the things that we talk about all the time as a negative impact we're having on the biosphere. This is just to say that things are not happening by chance. We're making this happen. Every time we pursue consumption and production that we celebrate because we're told we need to be consumers, we are triggering a lot of different impacts that have a negative consequence in our environment, on ourselves, on our health, on our social cohesion, and so on and so forth. And this has been accelerating over the past few years. So it is true that there has been a miracle, an economic miracle, since the Second World War, but that miracle has happened at a huge cost. And in many cases, we may even question whether it's a miracle at all. So this is a cartoon that I like a lot. You know, this is usually what economists do, right? They look at the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, and they look at the little bubble, and they wonder, you know, like, oh, I'm going to be so much happier when this is all over. And they don't see the huge bubble coming behind them. That is climate change, that is biodiversity destruction, that is going to have a massive impact on the economy. For as long as we believe that the only way to be on this planet and to be in the economy is through consumption and production, and unless we consume and produce, we do not generate any wealth, we're going to be creating more and more bubbles, more and more instability, more and more crises. There is a lot of work that has been done on the economic impact of climate change. And nothing we've seen at this stage, nothing we've seen so far, is ever going to be comparing the kind of economic impact that climate change will have on our economies. And again, just like we shouldn't do it for the planet, we should do it for ourselves, I fundamentally believe we should change the economy to save the economy. Otherwise, whatever we mean by economy is never going to survive itself. John Keynes, the famous economist, used to say capitalism needs some fixing from time to time, otherwise it destroys itself. And I think this is happening again. Let me give you a bit of a summary of the past 60 years. This is a story of two lines. The first line, the dark black line you see up top, is a line that we all know. It's the line of growing economic consumption and production. It's the line of GDP, the gross domestic problem, as I call it. It's a line that makes economists feel proud of themselves. It's why economists have become so important. Is there any economist in the room? Don't be shy. There you go. There's hope for all of you. Let me tell you. We're here. This is also a way, it's detox, it's rehab. We all have to go through that kind of process. I'm an economic historian myself, and I feel terrible because we have known as economic historians these issues for so many years. We haven't said a word to our friends, the economists. You know, we knew it, but we didn't communicate, perhaps for lack of social cohesion within our economic departments. So this is a story of two lines. The dark line is the line of success. It's what makes our politicians talk about all the time. It's what we keep on pursuing.
We simply say we need to increase consumption, production. I promise we're going to have better growth. Even we make this mistake from time to time when we talk about well-being. We still consider as part of well-being levels of economic consumption. It's still like a little virus that gets into our measures of well-being, you know, how much we consume, as if consuming per se was an indicator of anything. You know, the concept of consumption comes from epidemiology. The study of epidemiology in the late 19th century, the study of bacteria, and especially tuberculosis, the scholars came up with this term, consumption. It was basically the phenomenon that led bacteria to destroy the host in the development of the disease. Then obviously economists came by and they said, look, what is the best example of the kind of being that we associate with citizens in an economy? And they looked at bacteria and they said, we do exactly the same. That's what we do to society. We feed ourselves off society, off the planet. Let's call citizens consumers, just like epidemiologists would call, like the disease, the bacteria consumers. So that's the story of consumption. And that's what makes people say, what's the matter with you guys? What's the problem? We've done so well. We keep on doing better. There's a couple of bumps during the crisis, during COVID, but then things resumed and we're doing better than ever. But then there's a different story, and that's the dotted line at the bottom. And the dotted line is what I call the curve of well-being. So it's not measured according to subjective well-being. It's a different type of measurement. It's based on a different indicator called the genuine progress indicator. And it does something simple, something as simple that my kids get it so easily, but my colleagues in the economics department are still struggling with it. And it simply says, look, I could consume because I really want something, and that adds to my satisfaction. Or I could consume because I have a problem, and therefore I need to consume medicines because I'm sick. I need to get training because I need to rehab because I've had an accident. I need to consume security services because crime is on the rise and I need to protect myself. I need to consume bottled water because, the tap water is contaminated. Well, let's distinguish between consumption that really adds to my well-being because I really want to do it, going on holiday with my family, and consumption that I have to do because things are screwed up and now I have to protect myself. It's called defensive consumption. Now, when you do that, look at the difference. Up until the 70s, more or less, our level of well-being and our level of economic growth were going on par. But by the late 70s, early 80s, the two stories change. We consume more and more things that don't add to our well-being. I come from South Africa, one of the highest levels of, what is the biggest employer in South Africa, by the way? The sector of society that employs most people in South Africa. I've lived there for 20 years. I'm a South African citizen. That's where Catherine and I met. What's the biggest employer in South Africa? You would think mining. I could read your lips. This is a skill I'm developing now, lip reading. Mining. Obviously, you would expect that kind of answer from an Australian. And it used to be. I don't know whether this is going to happen in Australia as well. Hopefully not. It used to be mining. Now it's private security. Most of economic growth in South Africa is because people need to protect themselves against one another. I think in the US, it's on the rise as well. I mean, if you think about the US, I keep telling my children, I don't know how to explain this to you, but the US is the richest country in the world. They're #1 producers of a number of things. We look at them like, that's the future, hopefully for everyone. And then they are on the verge of a civil war. They hate one another. They have the largest levels, the highest numbers of obesity, one of the highest in the world, cardiovascular diseases, divorces, you name it. How do you reconcile the fact that our development path, our development journey, makes us all look, if we do it, like America, which is obviously a failure? You would expect the US to be full of people who are so satisfied with one another that are, I wouldn't say happy, because happy is a personal story, it's your own journey, but have high levels of well-being. Instead, they are a very unstable country. 20% of our GDP is spent on medical care, and yet they're sick. That makes sense. Because GDP grows when you're sick, because you need a lot of medicines, you need a lot of treatment, you need a lot of hospitals, you need a lot of insurance companies. Insurance companies are very expensive, and then you have to work hard to pay the insurance companies, and the next thing you know, you're living your life just to pay your health care bills. And that's America. Now, that story there is a story of most countries around the world. That's a global average. So ever since the 80s, our levels of well-being have gone down. Objective well-being. It's not just asking people how they feel, which is absolutely important. We need to do that. When you look at the objective measures of well-being, how long do you live, whether you're sick or not sick, whether you can drink water that is not contaminated, whether you've got schools, whether you've got a good level of education, whether you have time to spend with your family and friends, we're not doing well at all. We may have cars, we may have nice gadgets, but there's a fundamental problem with our development path globally. And this is another cartoon that Catherine and I share from time to time. It's a bit old, but it's an evergreen. If you think about it, if you really think about our conversation now, it's all about the meaning of life and what makes us live in a fulfilled fashion. For many of us, climate change is not the issue. I mean, I don't really care much about climate change. I mean, I'm scared, obviously, that something terrible is going to happen to all of us, and it's already happening. But at the end of the day, whether climate change was true or not is not the point. That's why, if Donald Trump was to go to the UN again and give that beautiful and eloquent speech he gave the other day, as he always does, and was to say that climate change is the greatest con job in the history of humanity, I would say, so what? What we need to do to fix the climate is what we need to do anyway to fix ourselves. It's about better energy, being more energy secure. It's about better housing. It's about more time for ourselves and the people that matter. It's about consuming not more, but what we need in order to live well. It's about, that list. And that's why the guy, that guy standing up, the climate denier that says, what if this is just a big hoax and we build a better world for nothing? That's precisely the point. And I think many environmentalists got it wrong because they try and make us feel that we need to do it for the climate. Just like for many years they told us we need to do it for the panda, we need to do it for the koala, we need to do it for someone else. They should have said, we don't need to do it for the environment, we need to do it for ourselves. We're not on the right trajectory. And if the extinction of mankind is the price we need to pay, then I think it's a pretty high price to pay. So this is what we like with many colleagues, we brought together the different work that is being done in environmental science, health science, sociology, and political science. And we see that these things are closely interconnected. That's why we talk about a polycrisis. What we're really living through is a polycrisis. The environmental crisis is caused by our consumption levels. Our consumption levels are a result of our fundamental societal depression because we don't have much time to do else. The way in which our economy is being structured makes it almost impossible to do anything else. Last night I was telling some colleagues that even I suffer from this compulsive instinct to be doing something. When I watch TV with my wife, and my wife needs to go to the bathroom. My wife goes to the bathroom a lot. But that's not the point. It takes 20 seconds for her to go to the bathroom. The first thing I do, I grab my phone and I check something online. And honestly, there's nothing I need to check. I keep looking at the same web pages all the time. The news, as if something was has happened over the past 20 seconds. I keep doing it compulsively. We all do that all the time. As soon as someone stops talking to you, the first thing you do is that either you grab a cigarette or you drink, or you take the phone. Because the idea of just being idle, being on your own, is impossible to accept in a society that has made us compulsively obsessed with doing something or consuming something. And the institutional crisis we live is a byproduct of all of this. I mean, honestly, I don't fault many of my American colleagues and friends for even have at some point considered, like voting for someone else, or many Americans supporting Donald Trump, or many other conservative governments in Europe that are way more extremist than what we are usually associated with conventional right-wing politics. I don't fault them because I think they're looking for a different answer. They're looking for something that is out of line with what we do. And the only answer they get, the only conversation that is happening on changing the system is happening often within the ultra-right. And the institutional dissatisfaction with democracy. The other day, I'm going to say this with not a pinch of salt, a huge block of salt. Coming back from China, I had a conversation with another friend of mine, another progressive, and we looked at each other and we said, can you believe that we would have said in the 21st century, in 2025, that the biggest driver of innovation in the world would be the Communist Party of China. That democracy is unable to produce the kind of innovations and activities that we see happening in a totalitarian regime. So what can we do about democracy? How can we fix it? We also questioning, the fundamental philosophy of a democratic system. Why is it that it's not producing the intended outcomes, at least to the point of making us able to change the rules of the game? And that's when we come to this point. So if, as we said here, the main problem here is that we lack purpose. And I think this is the conversation we need to have here. This is the conversation that Bill, when I heard Bill during the introduction and then our presentation on subjective well-being, the well-being of Australians, I wanted to get up and say, the main problem behind all of that is that we get up and we don't know why we do that every day. We go to work, we don't really know what we work. We're playing this video game and we don't really know what's the purpose of it. And that is what's making a lot of young people so uneasy, so unhappy, because they wonder, Mom, Dad, why do you do what you do? And I dare you say to them, I want to know what kind of answer you would give them. What's the purpose behind everything we do on a daily basis? And perhaps many of us have simply accepted that there was no purpose. Maybe at some point we simply jumped on the bandwagon of thinking, well, this is the post-war period. It's more of the same and more of the same. But now we got to a turning point in which, unless we answer this question, we're not going to go on. We're not going to continue. And a lot of the mental illness, a lot of the depression, a lot of the sense of aimlessness is part of this lack of purpose. And so, with some colleagues, and Catherine and I back in the day, we thought, well, the purpose is well-being. As simple as that. It's always been the purpose. We created something we call the economy because at some point humans decided to live better. It was as simple as that. So they organized the economy, which is nothing else than a game. It's an artificial invention. It's a social construct. We created it because we wanted to coordinate ourselves to live better. That was the purpose from the very beginning. But that purpose was lost. So we thought about the possibility of actually going back to the roots and leapfrogging to a new development model in which well-being is not a side dish. It's not an afterthought. It's not something that we need to add to what we do. It's the only thing we should be doing. The well-being economy. And what is a well-being economy? Well, science tells us that living well is the byproduct of two simple things: healthy ecosystems and good social connections. Unfortunately, the economy we have has given us exactly the opposite. We are destroying the environment, we're separating ourselves from the environment, and at the same time, we have less and less time to enjoy with other humans. That's why we are where we are. So in a well-being economy, the economy grows, so we could have economic growth. We're not against economic growth. We simply changed the content of economic growth. Economic growth is not more consumption, it's better consumption, which means positive social and environmental impacts. So from more to better, we should have an economy that focuses on quality rather than quantity. Still, unfortunately, many people in our departments of finance at the Treasury, they actually sit day in, day out thinking how they can make us consume more, because that's what's measured in GDP. And believe me, measurements matter a great deal. They're giving us indicators. Indicators, they indicate the way, right? Indicators are never neutral. They're invented to tell us where to go. So if an indicator says you consume more, you're better, you consume more, and you end up consuming more. So it should be more on quality rather than quantity. Should see growth as improvement rather than expansion. Okay, we think of, organize our economy around expanding markets. Even the language, expanding markets, expanding options, expanding companies. Catherine and I have been having issues with the concept of scaling up for so long. How do you go to scale? How do you go to scale? My economist colleagues here probably tell their students, if you come from a business school, that's one of the mantras. You're a small company. How do you go to scale? How do you scale it up? How about growth has improvement rather than expansion in size? Productivity should be changed to optimization. You optimize production. You try and make it as efficient as possible in well-being terms rather than maximizing it. You shouldn't produce more. You should produce better. Success shouldn't be measured anymore in terms of GDP or equivalence. And look, at GDP at the national level is just the godfather of all the other performance metrics we use on a daily basis. How many academics are in the room? Don't be shy, We forgive you for being that. How many of you are measured in terms of how many papers they produce? Come on, everyone. We know that that's the case. And a lot of those papers may be rubbish, but, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, right? Because we're counting beans. Very few people say, look, I'd like to promote you because you've written one beautiful paper that has made a big difference. You don't get a promotion. You get a promotion if you publish or perish, papers all the time. It's quantity rather than quality. And finally, leadership. That's another term we need to change. How many people come from business schools here? Okay, it gets worse and worse, I'm kidding. No, it's like, how many of you talk about leadership all the time? And the idea of leadership that we still communicate to our students is the single man, usually a man, not even a woman, the single figure that leads in a different way and has got an army behind. Well, the idea of leadership that would work in a well-being economy is stewardship, is looking after things, is taking care of things. Like our unpaid carers, we're all unpaid carers. And we should be proud of that. As hard as it is, it's part of us as we are as humans. How does this translate? Again, we need to have better performance. That means that we need to change productivity indicators. We need to change the financial rewards. In a well-being economy, you cannot get a promotion only because you do more and you make more. You need to do better. That's how you get rewarded. That's how you get a promotion. Unfortunately, in our societies, we're still living this schizophrenic attitude in which we are suffering from this chasm between, I'd like to do well, but on a daily basis, I'm assessed on doing badly. I'd like to be a different professor, but if I don't publish, I'm not going to get promoted. I'd like to be a different manager, but if I don't produce, I'm not going to get my job. And so our performance indicators are not aligned with well-being outcomes at the level of any organization around the world. I still have to find the university that has fully embedded these principles and how it works, and even the companies that do so, let alone the ministries and the departments and so on and so forth. Better work-life balance. The well-being economy studies and science around well-being tells us that when we work better, we work our impact is on many different levels, and it's much higher. We increase productivity in terms of optimization. We reduce the risk and the impact of sick leave, improve child upbringing. We create positive systems, the best thing we could do is to raise your children properly. That's the best impact you can have on their education, the lack of, their lower propensity to commit crime, and this has positive impacts on society. So if I were the prime minister of a country, I would say, let's focus more on how we raise our children. Let's create opportunities for families and parents both to spend more time with their kids. The age between 0 and 6 is when the brain forms. After that, you're screwed. If you don't focus on that one, there's no hope in this room. It's too late for us. But between 0 and 6 is when we build the citizens of the future, and that's precisely when we don't have schools, when we don't have time for them, when we put them in a corner and tell them, here is an iPad, watch TV, try and spend some time so that we can focus on you later on. By that time, it's too late. Better production and use. Of course, our our industrial production processes shouldn't focus on durability. Nowadays, focus on plant obsolescence, where you cannot fix or change anything, and more in investing in circular economies, of course. Better value from extractive paradigms, which is still very common, to regenerative paradigms. I'm going to say something about this later on. And as I said, better stewardship, inclusive goals, long-term approach, systems thinking. This kind of simple systems thinking that I've shared with you, that shows how investing in children has a positive impact on their education, makes them less likely to get sick, has a positive impact on reducing crime, and builds that strength, is hardly done at any levels of managerial leadership. Very few people think in systemic ways. They think linearly. There is a problem. I need to find a solution to that one, even if by doing so I generate millions of other problems I don't really care about. It's going to be someone else's job to fix them. The well-being economy has been translated into many different reforms. You know this, some of you know this very well. Those of you that are familiar with the Wellbeing Economy Alliance may have seen some of these reports already in countries like Scotland, where Catherine operated back pre-COVID. They came up with a number of national performance frameworks to try and change the way in which the government saw well-being in national economic policy. In Wales, as you know, having introduced a Wellbeing for Future Generations bill in this country, in the national conversation, was the first country in the world that started looking at how we're doing for future generations and making it part and parcel of how national policy is designed. The same has happened in Iceland and other countries that have created what we call the well-being economy governments. One of the first, well, the first formal alliance of governments around the world that make the purpose of well-being explicitly their national policy goal. How does well-being accounting work compared to conventional accounting? Okay. On the top line, you have conventional accounting. I mean, like for an economist, for someone that works in the National Statistical Office, all you need is, well, look at the costs, right? What are the costs? The raw material that you use, labor, and the energy. That's what you measured at as part of your inputs. Then you're looking at how much the production process will cost in terms of machinery. The only thing that GDP considers as a loss of value is depreciation of machinery. You know that GDP doesn't really measures, how much it costs to use a machine over time. Of course, that depreciates over time, but it doesn't ever measure how much it costs to use people over time. So there's no depreciation of humans. There is no impact on labor. Machines have a value for how we measure economic growth, transportation, distribution, and then all that matters is that at the end of the day, when you sell whatever you have produced, the value that has come at the end is higher than what you had to pay during the production process. In a well-being economy, it's very different. In a well-being economy, of course, you measure all the material costs of production, but you also add other things, positive and negative side effects, positive and negative externalities. You look at the ecosystem services as an input. A well-being economist doesn't consider production only confined to what we make as humans. How many of you could actually grow anything without rainfall, without the bees, without the ecosystems producing services for free every single day? And we know, after measuring it time and again, that the economic value of ecosystem services is over $150 trillion every year. What was the GDP last year? What's the annual GDP? Have you ever come across this figure? The global national product. It's $112 trillion. So nature gives us $150 trillion every year so that we can produce $112 trillion. What kind of system is that? Sorry, in my opinion, that's not something that works. We'd rather take the money from nature and do nothing. It'd be probably more profitable, because our economic production process has huge costs and produces in a very, very inefficient way. So you look at what ecosystems are doing for us. For instance, in some country like Costa Rica, this kind of thinking triggered a process of payment for ecosystem services. I'm assuming that the same may be happening in some parts of Australia as well, paying peasants to actually protect the ecosystems, because the ecosystems are fundamental inputs into economic production. So preserving them, not using them, preserving them, is an economic contribution that has a value for the nation. Social contribution is the same, the time that is spent doing a certain job, doing a certain work. The process value is the same. Machinery, transportation, and distribution, everything that conventional production process considers, but also inclusivity, how inclusive that is. Is it triggering alienation? What's the impact on workers? I mean, do they have, because the impact on workers has a cost for the economy. If workers do not spend enough time at home, their children will not grow up with their parents. And statistics tells us that kids without the upbringing of both parents are much more likely to live a life that is, has a high propensity to crime, social alienation, and so on and so forth. And guess what? We all have to pay then to fix that. Again, it's not just a social problem, it's also an economic problem. And health impacts, and so on and so forth. How many of our diseases, our chronic diseases, are generated by the type of work that we perform? And what kind of impact that has on the national budget, for instance. And at the end of the day, in a well-being accounting system, your company is really productive if it's generating well-being impacts, well-being value that is higher than the value it uses to operate. This is something that we show to our managers during our training camps. We say to them, look, every activity has a cost. Let's not be naive. Everything we do has an impact. Even ends have an impact, okay? There's no human activity that doesn't have an impact. What matters is that the value you produce is truly higher than the value you use to operate. And it's an inequality which is simple enough. The input value at the environmental, social, and economic level the input value needs to be lower than the output. If you manage to generate more value with your processes, you are a profitable company. If you don't manage to do so, you're not. Unfortunately, at present, this is data from the United Nations Environmental Program, most energy companies and most food production companies are not profitable because their environmental and social costs far outweigh their profits. So if they were to give the money back and pay all the profits, they wouldn't be able to cover the expenses of the damage they generated. The Wellbeing Economy Alliance was created by Catherine and friends back in 2017 in order to pursue and push these agendas around the world, and they're doing a great job in this country as well. This is a couple of books, self-promotion. In 2017, after the conversations with Catherine, we thought, okay, let's put in a book, some of the key elements of this new ideas around doing better rather than doing more. And more recently, we're publishing a new book which really speaks to the market and to business leaders to try and motivate them to push their economic activities to the next level. At present, and I'm nearing the conclusion of this presentation, at present we're leading a debate at the International Standards Organization. Those of you that come from business schools or come from the market, from business, know this very well. ISO is the International Organization for Standards. Those are the guys that come up with all sorts of rules that tell you how to operate more safely, how to make sure you save water, how to treat workers, and so on and so forth. The latest to be published later this year will be about well-being economic activities, how to run a well-being-based business. Okay, and it's going to be based on other standards like PAS 808 in the UK. So if you're interested in the practical practical applications of this, please talk to me during the break. Interestingly enough, ideas and beliefs have become also subjects of movies. You're going to see one film today. There's another one made in Iceland, which every year runs a summit for the well-being economy in Reykjavik. And this is a picture that I'm very fond of. 3 leaders who are no longer there. This was from some time ago, but this whole conversation at the policy level was started by 3 women leaders in Scotland, in Wales, and in Iceland. and then it expanded to other countries, and I'd love to see Australia as part of this list. For all the data I've seen, there's no reason why Australia shouldn't be there. I mean, like when you show those, the OECD Better Life Index rankings, it was all these countries, and then there was Australia in between. I was like, you should join this grouping. It makes a lot of sense, so you can improve yourself, and at the same time, show other countries how to try and focus on what works in Australia. And then I'd like to close with this. So what is really critical is that we bring the market on board. This cannot be a conversation among academics, among statisticians. We won the statistical battle a long time ago. Now we need to win the practice battle. We need to show that companies can operate with these models and so on and so forth. So what we did in Italy, and I'm mentioning a country that I'm not particularly proud of, it doesn't do well in those rankings, but we Italians have from time to time some interesting innovations, some interesting ideas. Pizza and, Aperol Spritz, and also these things. So this is a model that we learned from academic studies in America, and then we imported in Italy, and it's basically a simple idea. The profit and non-profit, this distinction makes no sense. So we have been used to the fact that companies make a lot of money, create a lot of mess, then they give money to charities to kind of clean it up. That makes no sense. It's like, I teach my children, you need to tidy up your room. You can't simply say, but I'm studying. And so what? You study and look after your room while you study. You cannot rely on someone else to clean up after you. We got used to the fact that the guys that do profits don't need to care about it, because there's the non-profit guys that will come and fix it, often with the money from the culprits. We need to bridge this gap, and we need to have the future of business that is based on what we call benefit corporations, or you can call them well-being corporations. Basically, the idea is that in the running of your own business, you incorporate well-being as your purpose and needs to sit next to profit. So what we did in Italy in 2016, we became the first sovereign country to introduce a law that basically said companies need to have well-being outcomes, environmental and social, on par with profit in their constitution, not in their corporate social responsibility, not in philanthropy. We even openly said in the future, philanthropy and CSR should actually disappear. Milton Friedman, remember the bad guy, the Nobel Prize winner, when he said the only business of business is business against all philanthropy and CSR? I agree. And that's when no one is going to applaud. I agree, because I think business should only do business, but what we mean by business must change. Business must be well-being value. I want the CEO of a company to think about profit alongside well-being outcomes every day, not the day before Christmas, which is usually when they do that, because they have to give a speech and give some meaning to what they do. On every day, they need to do this. So we created a law that is now expanding globally. Look how many countries have adopted the same law. I'd like Australia to be next. Again, I'm looking at you guys because I remember that the VC was here and his buddies with the government. So I'd like this. This is also an opportunity to say that Australia is not only doing pretty okay on subjective well-being, but it's also translating it into a practice for companies. Having a law that establishes the profile of a purpose-driven, well-being-driven benefit corporation could make a huge change, because it makes managers accountable to their shareholders, not only based on profit, but based on well-being outcomes. In Italy, we have more than 5,000 companies that have transformed themselves into benefit corporations in less than 10 years. And my closing reference is this one. I think the change that we see in the world is often caused by the intersection between a demand and supply. You need to have a leadership, stewardship, political stewardship, supply for change, well-being reforms, the fiscal incentives. We need that. But we often forget about the demand part. So we ask government to produce well-being frameworks, measure what matters, and so on and so forth. And where's the business side of things that says, I want those instruments because I want to apply them to my companies. I'm gonna lobby for more of that. We need to activate the bottom part. We need to have more benefit corporations that become politically active and demand those reforms. We cannot expect politicians to commit suicide. So if politicians, I've seen it myself. That's the end of the movie, I shouldn't say that. But if you expect a politician to do the right thing only because it's right, it's never going to happen. You need to create the demand conditions whereby doing the right thing is also politically rewarding. You need to have more and more business operators, actors, and civil society actors that do that. And the value connectors, what helps us connect these two things are the indices, the measurements, the academic activities, because they make it visible. Every time we remind politicians that by destroying nature we destroy economic value, they pay attention to it. They help see something that usually they do not see. And in closing, I really believe that the well-being economy agenda is an agenda that speaks to everyone. It's not right or left. Everyone could relate to what we have said this morning. Everyone must care. If you're a conservative politician, you care about your community, right? You want to know that your people are doing well. You'd like to know that the water your people drink is good water, that the schools are in good condition, and so on and so forth. If you're a progressive politician, you want to know that the environment is in good shape, that people have a lot of opportunities to build social connections, and so on and so forth. I still need to find one single politician, one single person that would be against an economy based on well-being. And they've been told a story that well-being is a byproduct of consumption and production. That story is factually wrong. We need to regain control of that story, of that narrative, and build a message that is purpose-driven, is positive, and can actually warm the hearts and minds of everyone. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Dean. Thanks very much, Lorenzo. Now, there was a lot in there. Lots of different threads. I had questions prepared. They were excellent questions. But also, people have been using Slido, both here and those who are joining online. So what I'm going to do is I've got a few questions here that's been raised. You can see them up there. We might just start with, first of all, you can be anonymous, everyone. So you can have that cloak of anonymity when you're asking a question. But let's look at this first one. So people have been talking about measuring well-being for decades now, but decision-making still focuses on economic metrics that miss the bigger picture. Why?
Well, Anonymous, thank you for this question. Well, the main reason is that we haven't become political in how we use the metrics. We are stuck in the middle of that sandwich. We believe, and this is what the mistake that academics make all the time, we believe that by saying something that is correct, we have done our job. We can go home and simply be at peace with ourselves. And this is wrong. Papers don't live a life of their own. They need to be activators of lobbying, activators of pressure, activators of media conversations. We need to push for that. We haven't done that enough. We have won the statistical battle. I mean, those of us that go to the OECD summits have been going now for the past 20 years. We know that these issues have been discussed time and again, yet they stay within the confines of an organization that no one can actually relate to. Instead, we need to be activists. This is what Einstein did. You must have seen Oppenheimer. We just watched the movie. I mean, scientists in history have always taken a stance. Galileo Galilei actually took a stance and challenged the church. He didn't simply say, well, this is what I've written in my paper. I'm not going to take a position. They chopped his head almost. So, and that's what allowed science to progress.
It's what it means to be human.
It's what it means to be human, yes.
We're here once. Let's make the most of it. Lorenzo, we've got, just on that, what can we do being more activist? We've got a growing number of people, the tech billionaires, who have so much influence, and so much influence on our well-being, on some of the things that were highlighted even earlier today, around some of the social connections. What can we do?
This is a different question. It's not the one I see there, right? It's a question, is it?
It's the first one here. They have so much influence on our well-being, the tech billionaires.
The tech billionaires.
What can we do?
I honestly, okay, this,
Particularly if we're being activists as well.
no, I know. I feel pity for these tech billionaires, honestly. I mean, if you think about all the money that they have and the kind of lives they live, it makes me sad. I mean, so on the one hand, I pity them. On the other hand, it sounds very dystopian, what they could be triggering, what they could cause. My sense is that what we should do is to try and build a narrative that shows that having so much money and living these terrible lives is a sign of the decadence of society to a certain extent. I mean, like, and maybe one of them will wake up and say, you know what, maybe rather than spending millions and billions and billions to go to Mars or trying to build, I don't know what other technological nonsense, I'd like to do something that is useful for me, again, in my own self-interest, to try and enjoy my wealth over the next generations rather than having to forfeit it. I mean, making them understand that if they want to enjoy their wealth, they may as well do something positive and useful to make society better off, rather than the opposite. So I don't have much hope when it comes to tech billionaires, because I think the level of well-being is very low.
But could we have hope if we're taking that advocacy, activist position, and just looking at this question about the point made by, thank you, Anonymous, Australia currently has a wellbeing framework that it's almost entirely focused on measurement. So what can we do to move beyond that data and embed wellbeing across government that could perhaps influence, advocate for different ways that we could change the influence of the tech billionaires?
Yeah,
up on that thread.
So that's a good point. I think you could do what I said during my presentation, becoming more active, lobbying explicitly, running for office, even if it's an option, but also influencing business. Business has a strong power to play in society. Let me give you an example. For as long as I was an academic, people would come to me and say, you know what? Great ideas, they only work on paper. Fine. Then I became a politician, and we won an election. So it's like someone you say, you would never win an election. We won an election based on this, on principles around these concepts. And then they came to me and they said, you know what, good ideas, yes, you won an election, but you're never going to be able to run a company based on this. Now I run a company based on it. I give jobs to people. We produce also profits and revenues for everyone. Now it's harder to say that these ideas cannot get out of their papers, become majoritarian in an electorate, and even lead companies to transform and change. When you do that, then you move from measuring to practicing. And that's what makes a huge difference in society, for governments, and so on and so forth. So my encouragement would be try and make these ideas live. Make them work in practice on as many levels as you can. Be daring, be ambitious.
And look, that moves to some of the examples you were sharing with the shift in standards with ISO, International Standards Organization. But maybe you can share a little more around this next question of which governments or jurisdictions are using integrated wellbeing accounting and how they've implemented it. Spoke a little bit about that movement and what's changing. What can we do? What's the consideration for those here today with their different roles, different perspectives, professionally and personally?
So in general, there's varying degrees of successful application. Some of the governments I've mentioned have been pioneers, not without struggles and inconsistencies. So here, no one is depicting a done deal. So it's a work in progress. But at least they try and learn. We have a representative, a former representative of the government of the Parliament of Bhutan. In Bhutan, it's a small country, but actually with a big footprint. If you think about the fact that every time there's a conference like this, there is a Bhutanese friend somewhere, like trying to bring, the voice of a country that we would struggle to identify on a map. And Dave, come up with something extremely useful, the G&H Commission. So a commission that has the task of reviewing the policies the government comes up with to measure the well-being impacts of those policies. When we were in government in Italy, we did exactly the same. We created an office called Wellbeing Italy that was supposed to screen policies according to the same principles. In other countries of the well-being economy governments, they've done the same. Now, with varying degrees of success. There are elements of well-being reviews and well-being analysis that are happening in governments that are not part of the Well-being Economy Governments Alliance. So there are elements of that as well in countries that haven't yet made it to the level of that level of self-awareness. But I think what we need to do is to keep on insisting on the economic benefits of being a well-being economy, on the fact that the value that we produce is often indirect, but it's actually directly impacting our tax system, our social expenditure as a society, and so on and so forth. This is the case of the United States. By pursuing profit per se, you end up paying a lot of tax because you need to pay tax for healthcare that is dysfunctional, for all sorts of social problems that you cannot deal with because they're generated by the pursuit of profit. So you end up having a blown welfare system, often inefficient, that adds to consumption and tax costs. In many ways, one of our key arguments to government has always been that in a well-functioning, well-being economy, you can actually lower taxes. Because if you don't damage things in the first place, you don't need as much tax to fix it. That's a powerful argument. If you have less crime, you need less police. The other day, I was with the mayor of Rome, who was a good friend of mine, former minister of finance when I was in government. And he came to me and he said, Lorenzo, look at this. I've done a well-being economy project. And he took me to a hospital, brand new hospital. It was beautiful. And so he said to me, look, it's 8 stories. And I said to him, Roberto, that's his name, Roberto, in a well-being economy, this hospital would be 4 stories. And that's the thing. We're still thinking about well-being as provision of services, as what we can do to fix. We need to think about well-being in terms of what we can do to avoid creating the problems in the first place. It's all about prevention rather than treatment. It's all about education rather than rehabilitation, and so on and so forth. And this costs much less, and it means less tax.
Okay. It's we can focus on some of those messages though that are coming through. So some of the messages that you have shared very much lead towards let's tell others, let's share with our constituents, our colleagues, other businesses, how we're going, how we can push towards some of these different changes. And moving from the measurement and the management of it, the messages that need to be shared, and how can we safeguard against some of the messages that are coming out around well-being washing in businesses making claims that they shouldn't maybe be making?
Okay, so let me be quite cynical about this one. Well-being washing is already a step forward because they feel the urge to say something about well-being, right? So it means that we're winning. So I'm okay with it. Step 1 is let them talk about it because they don't even mention it. So if then there is no substance, we need to work on credible standards. That's why we're working at the ISO level. That's why we're working with in terms of national legislations and so on and so forth, the law on benefit corporations. You know how many people come to me and say, oh, come on, I'm doing this already. Why do I need to become a benefit corporation? The reason is that provided that you're doing it well, what if you change your mind tomorrow? Now you're a benefit corporation, you can't. What if your son or your daughter, by the time you leave the company, wants to do it differently? Well, now you're a benefit corporation. You can't, because changing the constitution of a company doesn't happen by the whim of your overnight decision. So it's a bit like changing a constitution of a country, right? It takes an effort then to derail. And there are parameters and so on and so forth that come with it. So as I say, well-being washing is a step forward, and then by becoming more and more credible in terms of also public scrutiny. public scrutiny is crucial. Patagonia, you may know the sports apparel corporation. That was one of the first benefit corporations in the world. Okay. Now, the impact of wrongdoing on the side of Patagonia, on their reputation, on their clientele, on their customers would be much more significant than any other company. So before doing something wrong, they think about it twice. So that's what, so in embedding that kind of element in their marketing, in their commercial activities and so on and so forth, generates positive incentives to try and toe the line.
Thank you, Lorenzo. We're going to have one last question. I just want to thank everyone for responding to Slido. There's been a lot of questions that have come through and for actively engaging in that. I think we're trying to cover quite a lot. And I reckon we could stay here for quite a while, but it's also time for more caffeine or a break for some fresh air very shortly. But it's coming back up. I'm just going to hone in on because we've covered Vanessa's question around the benefit corporation. I want to move to the one below, talking to a group of people who clearly have an interest, an active interest, activists perhaps, around trying to do something more in the wellbeing economy. We've been talking about it for a long time, but we still have the systems in place. And you're talking about positive steps in some of the changes in the systems, but we have the systems in place where decision-making still focuses on those economic metrics. And it misses what you were talking about, what you've been espousing. Why are we still in this place as a society, as a global society?
So let me ask you a question just in closing. What do you think in human history, what do you think has been the most significant driver of economic growth and economic success in human history? What factor? I don't know. You just
throw something out.
Let's make it interactive. Come on. Sorry, no, one at a time, because otherwise I don't hear anything.
Who's got the loudest voice? Yeah.
War. Politics. Women's liberation. Education. People wanting more money. So, health. Population growth. Electricity. These are all factors that made gigantic contributions. But in the history of mankind, the main driver of economic growth, what allowed us to build cities, to build agriculture, to build the big revolutions, has been slavery. Okay? So imagine we were sitting at around the 18th century, and someone was asking me the same question. But slavery has been around for so long, we talk about it and we don't make any changes. When is it going to change? I'd say soon. There is a point, after thousands of years, that someone has decided that the main driver of economic growth was absolutely unacceptable, that the exploitation of people, that was the extractive industry par excellence, extracting value out of human life, which has been the most long-standing institution in human history. Okay? So for millennia, intelligent people did something which we now find horrible. The same is going to happen now. We're on the verge of understanding that the basis of our extractive economy is just as wrong as it used to be during slavery. And intelligent people are accepting it. Intelligent people are justifying it up until a point when you cannot justify it anymore. So I think we're there. So why do we still have this? We have this because a lot of people profit from it, profit from this new slavery, even though ultimately they don't really profit if you think about it in well-being terms. As I said, even rich people suffer from lack of well-being. I used to tell my friends in South Africa, rich friends of mine, when we were overseeing a plan for land redistribution and more social equality, imposing new taxes, I would say to them, you should be in favor, because less inequality means less crime, means that you can actually enjoy your wealth. Because at this stage, you cannot enjoy your wealth. Many of my rich friends couldn't sleep at night if their daughters went to a party, because they wouldn't know whether they would come back. Many of them would be raped. So do you understand the price of inequality? It bites back. So just like slavery at some point, the economic argument against slavery became so powerful and convincing. The economic argument for well-being is about to become powerful and convincing. But it's not going to happen by itself. It needs to happen through the legs and actions and the activities of every one of us.
Please join me in thanking Lorenzo.